By the time winter settled fully over Western Germany, the war had already begun to eat itself from the inside. Rail lines were broken, supply depots abandoned, roads choked with refugees, retreating units, and shattered equipment. For the German military, defeat was no longer theoretical. It was visible everywhere, in the empty fuel drums, in the mismatched uniforms, in the silence of radios that no longer received clear orders. Among those caught in this unraveling were thousands of German women. Clerks, radio operators, anti-aircraft auxiliaries, nurses, logistics staff, women who had been folded into the war machine not to fight but to keep it functioning. Many had marched, worked, and slept for months without rest as the front collapsed around them. When American forces pushed eastward in late 1944 and early 1945, capture often came suddenly. A village taken at dawn, a road cut off, a column halted by tanks appearing where no tanks were supposed to be. For these women, capture did not arrive with a dramatic moment of surrender. It arrived with exhaustion. They were gathered quickly, separated from male prisoners, and moved away from the front lines, sometimes on trucks, often on foot. It was during these movements, long, cold, relentless, that the pain began. The boots were the first problem. German service boots issued to women were rarely designed for prolonged marches in winter conditions. Many were secondhand, repaired repeatedly, or taken from storage meant for shorter duty cycles. The leather stiffened in freezing temperatures, soles cracked, seams rubbed raw skin with every step. At first, the discomfort was manageable, cold, dulled sensation. Adrenaline carried them forward. The fear of stopping outweighed the pain of continuing. But as the hours turned into days, something changed. Their feet began to swell. Marching in cold conditions causes circulation to fluctuate. Blood constricts, then rushes back when movement resumes. Inside rigid boots, there was nowhere for swollen flesh to go. Toes pressed against leather that no longer flexed, heels rubbed until skin softened, split, and tore. Some women felt warmth at first and assumed it was a return of circulation. It wasn't. It was blood. They did not see it immediately. Wool socks absorbed it. Bandages improvised from cloth hid it. But with each step, the damage deepened. Blisters burst, toenails loosened, skin cracked open along the sides of feet and between toes. The cold preserved the injury even as it worsened. They were not allowed to stop often. American units were moving fast, under pressure to keep prisoners away from combat zones. Halts were short. Instructions were clear. Keep moving. Some women began to limp. Others adjusted their gait, walking on the sides of their feet to avoid pressure. A few quietly removed socks during brief rests and stared at what they found, shocked by how much damage could occur without immediate pain. One woman, later interviewed decades after the war, described the moment she realized something was wrong. "When we stopped, I could feel my socks sticking to my skin," she said. "When I pulled them off, they came away slowly. That's when I saw the blood." She wrapped her feet again and kept going. Almost all of them did. The idea of asking for help did not come easily. These women had grown up in a system where complaints were signs of weakness. Injury was secondary to duty. Pain was something to be endured quietly. And now they were prisoners. They expected indifference at best. Cruelty at worst. As the marches continued, some women began to fall behind. Not dramatically, not collapsing outright, just a few steps slower each hour. The distance between them and the main group grew longer. American guards noticed. At first, it was treated as fatigue. Hand gestures urged them forward, voices raised slightly, a sense of urgency but not anger. Then one woman stumbled badly during a halt and did not get up immediately. A guard approached, cautious but alert. He motioned for her to stand. She tried. When she did, she nearly fell again. The guard pointed to her boots and made a questioning gesture. She hesitated. Then, with hands shaking more from embarrassment than cold, she loosened the laces and pulled one boot off. The smell came first. Blood and damp wool in cold air carries a distinct scent. Not rot, not infection yet, but rawness. The guard leaned closer, then straightened immediately. Her sock was dark with blood. When she peeled it back slightly, the skin beneath was split open along the heel and ball of the foot. Cracks ran across swollen flesh. Dried blood filled the seams. The guard did not shout. He did not recoil. He called over another soldier. They spoke briefly in English. Low voices, quick glances at the line of prisoners still standing in the cold. The woman expected to be ordered to put the boot back on and keep moving. Instead, she was told, through gestures, To sit, others watched closely. Another woman was asked to remove her boot, then another. Within minutes, it was clear this was not an isolated case. Dozens of women had similar injuries, some worse, some barely able to stand once boots were removed. The realization spread through the American unit that continuing as planned was no longer possible. This was not mercy in a dramatic sense. It was recognition of a problem that, if ignored, would create casualties. Prisoners unable to walk become a logistical crisis. The decision was made quickly. The march halted earlier than planned. A temporary holding area was established, an abandoned farm compound with several barns and a partially intact house. The women were moved inside, out of the wind. Medical personnel were requested. For many of the prisoners, this was the first time since capture that they were indoors. The barns were cold, but the ground was dry. Straw was scattered quickly. Guards distributed what blankets they could spare. When U.S. Army medics arrived, they worked methodically. There was no commentary, no judgment. Boots were removed, socks cut away where they stuck to wounds. Feet were cleaned with cold water and antiseptic that burned sharply against open skin. Bandages were applied carefully, sometimes layered thicker than usual to reduce friction. In some cases, boots were replaced entirely with oversized American footwear. Awkward, mismatched, but softer and less rigid. The women watched this process in silence. They had been taught that American soldiers were brutal, careless, driven by revenge, that complaints would be ignored or punished. Instead, they saw men kneeling in straw, focused entirely on injured feet. Not faces, not uniforms, feet. One woman later wrote in a letter that this was the moment she began to feel something she could not name at the time. It was not gratitude, she said. It was confusion. Everything I expected did not happen. Over the following days, the women were kept in that holding area longer than planned. Movement was slowed, marches shortened, rest periods increased. Those with severe injuries were transported by truck rather than on foot. This was not universal kindness. It was uneven. Some units had more supplies than others. Some commanders were stricter. Conditions remained harsh. Food was limited. Cold persisted. But the pattern was clear. When feet bled inside boots, it was treated as a problem to be solved, not a weakness to be punished. In subsequent camps deeper inside Germany, similar measures appeared. Prisoners were allowed to loosen boots during rest. Socks were dried when possible. Foot inspections became routine. In one camp, guards permitted women to remove boots entirely during nighttime barracks hours, something unimaginable under German discipline. The women noticed these details more than larger gestures. Not speeches, not promises, small adjustments, the ability to sit without boots cutting deeper into wounds, the permission to tend injuries openly, the absence of ridicule. Still, pain lingered. Healing in winter was slow. Frostbite threatened constantly. Infections were a real danger. Some women carried scars for the rest of their lives, thickened skin, damaged nails, altered gait, but they walked. They survived. And as weeks passed, many began to understand something unsettling. The enemy they had feared was not behaving as expected. That realization was not comforting. It was destabilizing. If the Americans were capable of restraint here, what else had they been wrong about? Some women struggled with guilt at receiving care while their own country had inflicted suffering elsewhere. Others avoided thinking about it entirely. But nearly all remembered the boots, the moment they removed them. The sight of blood where they had felt only numbness. The decision that followed, not to push them harder, but to stop. In the vast machinery of war, this moment mattered little. No headlines were written, no medals awarded. But for the women whose feet bled inside stiff leather, it changed how the war felt. Pain was no longer invisible, and survival no longer meant suffering in silence. When the war ended and these women returned to civilian life, few spoke openly about captivity. Fewer still spoke about moments like this. They did not fit the narratives of heroism or victimhood. But in diaries, letters, and quiet conversations years later, the memory returned. Not of cruelty, but of a guard kneeling in straw, holding a boot that had done too much damage. Of bandages wrapped carefully around wounds that no one had acknowledged before. Of the realization that sometimes, even in war, someone notices when the ground beneath you has already taken enough. If these stories matter to you and you want them to reach more people, please consider liking the video.